Hello YouTube, Lee here from FPL Family, and I'm joined today by one of my favourite new follows of the new 2021 FPL season. It's Mr. FPL Raptor, Ross Dowsett, gone from 0 to 60 on Twitter in absolutely no time at all. Ross, welcome to the FPL Family channel. Give the guys a bit of an introduction to yourself, tell them about yourself, and importantly, tell us, what was it like going from 0 to 4,500 followers on Twitter in literally the blink of an eye?
Oh yeah, I've just hit 5K today, which is a huge
There we go.
So the growth just continues. But so I've been sort of observing the FPL community from a distance on Twitter for a while now, and I decided that I'd finally get involved. My background, I've got a bachelor's in psychology and a master's degree in sports psychology. So I decided to try and apply those psychological concepts to Fantasy Premier League. Started off with a few threads, gained kind of 100, 200 followers, and people said that it's quite a niche market and that they didn't really see it very often. I know Tom from Who Got the Assist has done it a few times, but it's kind of a market that people haven't really looked at, and it's an area that people haven't really explored in relation to Fantasy Premier League. I just started writing a few threads. That kind of got a bit of traction. Then I started writing articles, and then obviously quite recently got the retweet from the official Premier League.
Yes, I noticed that. Yeah, I noticed that.
So, it's just been brilliant. The community's great. I've really enjoyed trying to apply those psychological aspects that we don't even really consider, and applying that to Fantasy Premier League, whether it's with our own decisions or whether it's looking at the psychology of the players or the managers. But there's so much scope with psychology that it applies to all that we do. So
it's great. No, it's great. And what I like about it is it's bringing something new and different to the FPL community. I haven't seen anything like it before. You know, a bit when Sam and I started, husband and wife rivalry thing, people are like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I think you've captured that as well, if you don't mind me saying, in terms of here comes someone that, can actually speak credibly about this stuff. And that's why I invited you on here today, because this is something that I've always been really interested in. And I think a lot of the FPL community are interested in the different managerial styles and how that affects the Premier League players, and therefore how that might affect FPL. But I, for one, definitely do not have the credentials to talk about it in any sort of with any sort of authority, although it is something that I'm really interested in. So that's why I'm hoping you're going to come in, because your background obviously is studying this stuff. You know all about it and are interested in it. So what we're going to try and do over the course of the video is we're going to look at all the different managers over the course of the Premier League. We're going to try and, do a few versus managers. So we'll look at Klopp versus Frank Lampard. We'll look at Pep Guardiola against Nuno Santo. We'll look at Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and if we've got time, Jose Mourinho as well, because Mourinho, of course, got his own very different style that he's kind of evolved over the last few years as well, very different to the likes of Klopp and Pep Guardiola. So we'll do a bit of that, and then towards the end of the video, I will ask you to kind of rank those managers in terms of their league performance. Who's the kind of Champions League of FPL or Premier League managers in your mind, and who's in the relegation zone, etc. So without further ado, why don't we start right at the top with Mr. Jurgen Klopp? And I make no apologies for starting with this guy. And without this turning into a 2-hour video about how great I think the man is, so you will have to rein me in a little bit. Give us your view then. You've labelled him as a transformational manager, a manager that practices transformational leadership. Tell us a bit about what that is and what sort of characteristics Klopp's got.
Yeah, so transformational leadership is at the forefront of sports psychology at the moment. It started in occupational psychology, so in workplaces. It's essentially considered kind of the gold mine of leadership. It's what we should all aim for when we're a manager or a leader in our everyday lives and in sport. Essentially, you're looking at treating the players as humans, building a family. It's called the 4 I's in research. So you're looking at 4 different concepts in being a transformational leader. So you're looking at being individualized consideration, which is looking at having one-on-one meetings. So we see all the time, Klopp talks about these one-on-one relationships. He has all the time after the game, you see him go and hug Robertson, go put his arm around Trent. He has little
micro conversations with them as well, doesn't he? Arm round it, little word in their ear, and just gets them going.
Yeah, just little nicknames, little inside jokes, personal meetings. So that's the first part of being a transformational leader. You've got intellectual stimulation. So you're looking here at kind of, can they inspire and motivate, but also can they allow creative freedom? So a lot of managers struggle with just telling players what to do. There's a brilliant quote from Klopp I've got in front of me. He says that you can't tell the players all of the information. So he might know something about the other team. He might know that their midfield rotate in a certain fashion, but he'll hold off that information because he likes to allow his players to be creative and have the freedom to adapt to that in a game. So he doesn't burden them with information, essentially. The third aspect is that inspirational motivation. So can he inspire his players when they're in a dip in form, or when they're 2-1 down in the Champions League final? Can he get them going? And obviously we know he can. And then the last one is idealized influence, which is just essentially, is he a role model? Does he do what he's asking you to do? Can he set a good example? And I mean, we see he's never, again, the quote that we've got here, he says, as a leader, you cannot be the last who comes in and the first that goes out. You have to be an example as well. That's how it is.
Yeah, I like that point you made about the family as well, and having that feeling of all belonging to something. I certainly feel like since, unlike previous Liverpool managers, and I think we kind of, as a fan base, got, I wouldn't say close to it with Rodgers, but Rodgers did, and maybe we'll touch on Brendan Rodgers a bit later, kind of tried to build that sort of feeling between the fans and the players of a family, but nothing like what Klopp has done. I mean, Klopp has definitely got the players working together for each other as a team, as a family, as you rightly say.
Yeah.
He's extended that out to the fan base and to the club as well. I mean, something I noticed when we missed out actually on signing Timo Werner recently, only a few weeks back in the summer. I was devastated at that because I really like Timo Werner. I think he's a really nice FPL pick, by the way, for this season, despite going to Chelsea. Not despite going to Chelsea, even though he's gone to Chelsea rather than Liverpool. I still think he's a good FPL asset at 9.5. And I was gutted to miss out. But then Klopp came out with a statement that said, well, how can I go and sign a player for 60, 70, 80 million, whatever he was going to be, when I'm furloughing staff in the canteen? I'm asking players to take pay cuts. How am I supposed to explain that to those people? So that for me was a massively emotionally intelligent way of it just brings the club together and makes sure that everybody's part of it. So to bring Werner in when maybe, you've got a bunch of people on furlough in the staff canteen was not the right thing to do for the club. Might be the right thing for the team to bring him in, but it wasn't for the club and for the fan base. And I really like that. That was great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was kind of searching through articles and looking at videos on Klopp ready for the video, and there's a quote he says where he says that he tests the players to make sure they know the name of everyone at Melwood. So he makes sure that they know the name of every dinner lady, of every physio, of every kit man. So it's never just kind of, oh, thanks for my food. There's this individual relationship, not just between the boss and his players, but between the players and the staff. And that then does extend to the fans. When you can see that your manager cares about the club, cares about the staff, and he doesn't bring players in for unnecessarily. Like you said, he's not bringing in Werner just for the sake because the striker's available. He only brings in players when he knows it won't harm the cohesion between the players. And as a fan, obviously, that's something you can get behind massively.
What does this mean for FPL, though, Ross? So we know that, obviously, Klopp has done a fantastic job at Liverpool and we're winning trophies, thankfully, and long may it continue as far as I'm concerned. But what does it mean for FPL? Why should we pick Mo Salah and Mane over, say, a Sterling or an Aubameyang at 12 million this season? And why has Salah in particular been so damn consistent from an FPL perspective in the last 3 years? Because he wasn't at Chelsea. You go back to his Chelsea days, and again at Roma, good player at Roma, but he's just a good player. Comes to Liverpool, has Jurgen Klopp's influence, and suddenly he's world class. So what's Klopp done there from an FPL perspective?
So Klopp is probably one of the only managers of premium clubs, if we're talking FPL, that will have a squad and very rarely rotate it. And that's why we always see the triple ups on Liverpool, because there aren't many premium clubs that would be winning the league and would basically use the same 11 every week. So that small amount of rotation means that we can obviously opt for the premium players and know that they will be good captaincy choices every week. Salah's, as we saw with Chelsea when he moved away, he's a player that responds very well to the arm around the shoulder. He responds well to that positive criticism, and he doesn't respond well to being dropped. He doesn't respond well to the manager openly saying that he's surplus to requirements. So he's a perfect fit for Jurgen Klopp. And I pulled up a stat here. His longest streak without an FPL return last season was 3 matches, and one of them he was injured for.
Oh, right, yeah.
So we're talking 2 games is the longest you'll have to go without Salah returning. So that's why he's such a fantastic set and forget captain or a set and forget player. And it's why most people will have him in their team all season. I mean, Mane's slightly streakier. But when you've got an emotional manager that will take the time after the match to talk to you when you haven't had a good game, you very rarely go on a run of consistently bad games, because he makes you feel like it's okay. He'll make you feel like you can bounce back. And that bounce back ability is because of Jurgen. It's because of that atmosphere that he installs at the club, where we are winners, we'll get back to it. And even if not, you are a human. And I'm going to treat you on that individual level. And playing for a manager like that should be easy for these players.
Yeah, I've seen it massively with certainly the two that you've mentioned, Salah Mane. But if you think about the third wheel up there, Roberto Firmino, you think about, sometimes I wouldn't say it's bad press, but sometimes, the focus from the press and other rival fans is, well, it's Salah and Mane. Those are the two guys, the world-class guys, and they are, no doubt about it. But Firmino's a bit of a bit part player. Now, we as Liverpool fans, I'm sure any Liverpool fans, if you're watching this, get in the comments, tell me if you agree. It wouldn't be the same team without him. The work rate that he does and the shifts that he put in really benefits the two guys out wide. And the fact that he doesn't score as many goals, Klopp is, he's fine with that. He sees him as his main man. He comes out publicly and talks about how great he is. He puts his arm around him every game. They're all smiles whenever they talk to each other. Presumably they talk the same language. They can talk in German together as well. So I think all of that helps to build that cohesive front three unit, which has gone on to dominate the world in the Premier League, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about team cohesion. Again, that's one of the forefront ideas in sports psychology at the moment. Is how can we improve team cohesion? In team sports, it doesn't matter how all your players are playing individually. If they can't play as a cohesive unit, it's no good. And when you're publicly backed by your manager, when you're receiving criticism, I mean, we'll get on to Mourinho in a bit, but he's often been the one to publicly criticise his players. And when you've got your manager defending you, even when you're not playing well, it means that you won't, like I said, you won't go a few games in a row playing badly. You will recover. And yeah, I mean, Firmino is the perfect example of that because, I mean, even as a United fan, I still rate him, but Klopp knows how to protect him and how to defend him and how to get the best out of his players. And he doesn't drop Firmino if he has a bad game or if he goes 5 or 6 games without scoring. We've seen Pep will drop Jesus or Aguero if they go a few games, but the fact that Firmino is completely and utterly nailed as that striker is a testament to Pep, to Jurgen Klopp's psychological skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, he touched on Jose Mourinho there. Let's go there next. I mean, I want to come back to Klopp and also comparing Klopp to Frank Lampard actually, because I think Frank Lampard, of all the managers in the Premier League, Arteta as well, I think, but Arteta's had a different sort of mentor, hasn't he, in Pep? So he's more likely to grow up, if that's the right phrase, into a Pep kind of charismatic leader. But I do want to touch on the Klopp and Lampard comparison a bit later on. But while you've mentioned it, let's talk about Jose, because Jose Mourinho is obviously a very different manager to Jurgen Klopp. And if Sam were here, I'm sure she would be defending him as the Spurs manager. But I can't help but feel he is almost the very opposite to Klopp in terms of he is kind of comfortable and happy to deliver that public criticism. He's kind of happy and comfortable to, like you say, drop players if he feels like they had a bad game or two. Very happy to, when he arrives at a club, pinpoint a player and almost kind of pick on them in a very Luke Shaw or Ndombele way, right? So what is he doing here? What are these characteristics? Because at the end of the day, let's not put him down too much. Jose Mourinho has won trophies. He's a very successful manager. So, we can't, be too negative about him because he's got a lot of trophies in his cabinet. So talk to me about Jose. What's his leadership style and how does he go about it?
So Mourinho is, I guess you could call him an old-fashioned leader. The psychological term for it is an autocratic leadership style. Essentially, it's a do as I say, not as I do. And
sounds about right, doesn't it, for Jose? Yeah.
It does, but it's been successful in the past. And I wouldn't ever compare Mourinho to Ferguson in their styles, but Ferguson was at points quite autocratic, and he managed to find a very good balance between inspiring his players, but also striking fear into them. And he was a do as I say, and if you don't, then you're out. But he had earned that, and he did it alongside a lot of other good things, like I say, inspiring his players and working with them on an individual basis. Mourinho, from a psychological point of view, at least, he gets everything wrong with regards to his player selections and the way he treats players. And like you say, publicly outing at least 1 or 2 players every time he comes to a club.
Yeah. And that's a consistent theme. He seems to do that everywhere he goes, doesn't he? Picks on somebody, right?
Yeah, and I think it's because he's trying to enforce this autocratic style, and it makes him look like he should be feared, and that there are consequences. He doesn't want to appear as someone that's all talk. And so this is his chance to pick a player that he doesn't get on with and show that is the person that is going to suffer. And if you kind of play and behave the same way as that player, you'll also suffer. And the fear tactic and the autocratic style, it can work short term. And we see him come in and get some brilliant results. And we see that it can inspire players in the big games against the other top 6 clubs. He'll pull a 1-0 victory against kind of Man City and the likes. But it can't be sustained long term. As a player, the psychological torment of being scared of your manager and of not sure what to say and like not having that individual relationship. It's not long term, and that's why we see the likes of Kane and Son struggling to go on these streaks that Salah would go on of 5 or 6 games in a row scoring, and it's why they don't haul. It's because in the bad times, rather than being supported and propped up by their manager, they're fearing what will happen next. Are they going to be shouted at? Are they going to be publicly shamed? Are they going to be dropped?
Do you think he can change, Ross? Do you think an autocratic leader who's got that autocracy in his DNA, and we've seen it, the short-termism that you mentioned, we see it every time he goes to a new club. It's the 3-year Mourinho plan. I've often talked about it on Twitter a few times, joked about it even to the point where he will come in, the first year is a build, it's a transition, it's a let's just try and improve on where we are, and let's not be too negative. Spurs did improve when he came in. They went from 14th to 6th, so there was some improvement there. Second year tends to get some success, might even be a trophy in the cabinet. Probably not one of the trophies that the fans would really want in terms of the Premier League or the Champions League, but there's an FA Cup or a League Cup, or as we've seen more recently, a Europa League that tends to get in the trophy cabinet. And then in the third year, it tends to all go completely south, doesn't it? And he tends to kind of leave the club in quite a bad way. So that short-termism is definitely there. But my question is, can he change? And the reason I ask you that question is because when he first came into Spurs, I remember seeing a couple of interviews where he said, look, I know what sort of leader I am. I want to change. I'm going to do things differently. And I do remember I remember watching Spurs' first game under Mourinho, and I can't remember who it was against, but I remember, I think they won. Might not have been the first game, might have been the Burnley game, about 2 or 3 games into his tenure at Spurs. They won 4-0, I think. It's a good result. And I remember after the game, he came onto the pitch, which is unusual for Mourinho. He doesn't always go walking onto the pitch, normally straight down a tunnel, handshake, and gone. But he started hugging all the players. And it was and the hugs with some of the players, in particular Heung-min Son, who I think is a very emotional player. I think he's one of those players that really does need an arm around him. I think Heung-min Son under Klopp would be absolutely unstoppable, by the way. But he kind of went up to Son and kind of gave him this really like Voldemort and Draco Malfoy awkward cuddle. And I was just like, this is just not right. Can an autocratic leader like Mourinho change his style, or is he forever destined to be autocratic?
I think, unfortunately for Mourinho, I think he's sort of put nail in his own coffin with the autocratic style. I think if he was Frank Lampard's age and with the experience that Frank has, or Arteta, I think you can change. And I think that's when you start to decide your leadership style. But when you've been practicing your craft for 20, 30 years, and that is the way you lead, you'll naturally fall back into those kind of habits. And that's what we see. I think he wanted to change. I think he realised that it isn't sustainable long term and that he will never be at a club for more than 3 or 4 years. And I think he wanted this to be his chance to be a new leader and to be a different style of leader. But with the emotional kind of roller coaster that is being a manager in a Premier League club, I don't think you can put up a facade for that long. And I think he's starting to fall back into his old habits, as we're seeing with Ndombele, and as we're seeing with publicly shaming people and his negativity in interviews. He's slowly dropping back into being the classic Mourinho, and so no, I don't think Mourinho will ever change, and I can't see him staying for longer than maybe another 1 or 2 years, maybe a return for Poch. But
there we go, return for Poch. She'll be happy next door, I can tell you. So Leopard can't change their spots. Maybe Jose's too long in the tooth, maybe, to change his autocratic style. But a manager you touched on there, who I think has got the potential to be very transformative in the way that Jurgen Klopp is Frank Lampard. I think we've seen a lot from Frank Lampard at Chelsea in his first year, and the way that he's gone about his business, the challenges that he had at the beginning of the season. Can't sign any players, got to bring young players through. It was almost a do your best, Frank. And if you come mid-table, that's probably okay. Well, listen, they're the champions. They get a fantastic season. And we're pretty close to actually claiming some silverware as well. So do you agree with me? Do you think Frank's got the potential to be a Klopp-style transformative leader? And if he isn't a transformative leader yet, what is he?
Yeah, so I fully agree with that. So out of the Lampard, Arteta, Ole, all the new managers that are coming through that are ex-players, I'd put Lampard above all of them at the moment. I've noted him down here as an adaptive leader, and I think that's what puts him above the likes of Arteta and Ole. And I'm not just talking about adaptive with response to tactics. I mean, we've seen him play 5 at the back, 3 at the back, we've seen 4 at the back. He is adaptive with his tactics, but he's also adaptive emotionally. And the adaptive leadership, similar to the transformational leadership, it has 4 key qualities, and I think he hits the nail on all of them. So the first is emotional intelligence. So he recognises the players' feelings in a way that a transformational leader would. He realises that they're not just players; they have these emotions, and they will go through these streaks of bad form and good form. And the key one here, the thing that makes him definitely an adaptive leader, is organisational justice. So this is just a fancy way of saying honesty, transparency. We see that Frank will come out in his interviews and say, we didn't play good enough, or we didn't play well enough. But I will happily take responsibility for that, and my players know they need to improve. I mean, after that 4-0 thrashing in his first game against United, he came out and said, I chose to play the youth. They had a bad game, but they will learn from this. And he, like Klopp, is willing to challenge those above him. And he's willing to challenge the CEOs of the clubs. And he's willing to say, hey, like, I need some support here. So he's got that honesty and transparency that perhaps managers like Ole don't have. And Arteta, he's not a yes man. He won't just do whatever Chelsea want him to do. Development is the third aspect of being an adaptive leader. So he's always happy to improve and adapt his tactics. He's happy to develop youth. He's happy to develop the club and go in a certain direction. But he's happy to change that. He's happy to adapt. You see at points he realizes, you know what, this isn't working for me. I'm willing to change this. And then the last is a deep sense of character. We're all getting behind Frank because of what he represents. He represents the idea that young English players can come through the system. He represents the idea that hard work is enough to get through those first few seasons. So, I can't rate Lampard highly enough for that first season. And I saw a lot of criticism for him being nominated for Manager of the Year on Twitter. I think he fully deserved it. I think with the transfer ban, with it being his first proper job after Derby, I can't rate Frank highly enough. And I think he's well on his way to being a transformational leader like Klopp.
He's likeable as well, isn't he? He's likeable, not just by the players, but by fans, by the media. I think you're right. The media in particular like that honesty. They like that. The fact that, I don't want to compare him with Jose Mourinho because they are two different managers at different stages of their careers. But, Jose is good. Mourinho is good media value for different reasons, isn't he? He'll sit there and he'll come up with a memeable comment or some sort of, some, I don't know, quip about something. Whereas Frank isn't about, he's not about deflection away from his team performances. He's about honesty. He's about character. He's just a likable guy. And I do think he's absolutely, I agree with you, of the managers that are coming through, and we'll talk about Ole and we'll talk about Arteta in a second. I think Frank has got the potential. From what we've seen, only one season, right? So we haven't really seen much of him. But listen, there wasn't too many Chelsea fans that were upset when Frank Lampard was coming in as manager. They'd obviously seen a lot more of this guy as it wasn't always the captain, was he? It was John Terry a lot of the time. But, Frank was almost kind of that midfield. He was kind of John Terry in midfield. He was the one that was coordinating and talking and being that leader. Without having the armband around his arm, he was very much the leader. In a different way to Terry. I mean, if John Terry ever becomes a manager, which you've got to assume he's probably doing, given that he's been at Villa for a bit, be very interested to see the two styles and how they're different. But I think you're right. Frank has got all the potential to be a very transformational leader. But what does that mean for FPL then? So coming up to the new season, we've got loads of options now in that Chelsea team. Interestingly, if you go back to, if you remember 12 months ago, there wasn't really any Chelsea players above 7 million. We were all looking for, where the young player is going to be. We weren't sure whether it's going to be Tammy or Giroud or et cetera, et cetera. All of a sudden, fast forward 12 months, the Frank Lampard effect has kicked in. They have been able to sign a couple of players. In particular, I want to get your thoughts on Pulisic, because Pulisic is one of those players who didn't start that well. He didn't hit the ground running in the Premier League. And Frank did what I thought was a very adaptive and transformational act, which was to kind of take him out of the team for a bit. If you remember, he kind of took him out of the team for a few weeks, let him get his head together, and then unleashed him again. And he was fantastic for a few weeks, and he was great when he come back from the restart, Pulisic. So tell me what you think it means for FPL. Who should we be picking, for example, from the Chelsea team?
So I've thought about it, and I think it's difficult with Chelsea at the start of the season to pick players, because you don't know who he's going to start. He's got a plethora of players in attack, defence, midfield. Not necessarily all the best players, but he does have options in all the positions. I think Frank trusts the youth, and he will not drop a player just because they have one bad game. So we've seen it throughout the season. He gave Tammy quite a few games when he was blanking. Same with Mount. He gave Tomori a few games after he made that big mistake. Yeah. I think that once you can see who he's picking and who he trusts, it's easy to jump on the bandwagon right at the start of that. And I think Tomori at 4.5 last year, and Mount, I think, was 6 million.
Yeah, he was me. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can find that player that he's going to trust, and he will not just play Ziyech, Werner. He will not just play Havertz, Kante. He won't just play them all season. He will trust someone from the youth, whether it's Mount or whether it's someone new. And I mean, Mount is definitely underpriced again this year if he does get in that first team.
I think he is. Yeah,
Um,
he's Frank's
yeah,
boy as well. I think Frank sees
he
a
is
lot
Frank's
of
boy.
himself
Yeah.
in Mount. Yeah.
I've just selected. It could cause a few discussions in the comments. I've looked at Hudson-Odoi at 6 million. If he doesn't move on loan, I think he's the sort of player that you could see Frank giving a few starts to or a few bench appearances, and then I think that's when you start jumping on those young players. But I think for the time being, you need to go with more of their premium players. But I think what it means for the Prem is that you can get some absolute bargains, because Chelsea are a premium side. They are going to finish in the top 6, maybe the top 4 again. So if you can jump on those cheap players as they're beginning to rise in value, I think that's where the value is for Chelsea players. And I think you won't see that in a lot of other big managers. They won't give the youth an extended run in the Premier League.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So speaking of top managers who maybe aren't giving youth a chance, I've done him a bit of a disservice there, Pep Guardiola. He has, he's giving youth a chance. He's giving Phil Foden very much a chance. In fact, he's probably got to give Phil Foden a bit more of a chance this season if he's going to keep him, especially since David Silva's not going to be around. But Pep Guardiola, you've written in your notes as a very charismatic leader, one that they don't doubt their decision-making processes or their outcomes, and clearly, despite has he been successful at Man City? Well, yes, he was for a few years, and maybe hasn't been in the last couple. But you can't say that he hasn't been a successful manager in clubs that he's managed in the past. So, what is Pep getting so right, and what is so good about his leadership style?
Yeah, so Pep, a charismatic leadership style. He is the best in the world at this, and I think it's what Mourinho used to do so well. It's just utter confidence in everything that you do. No one can doubt you because you're not asking them to doubt you, and you're not giving them a chance to doubt you. There's such a lack of internal conflict. When he says things, you don't think, is he doubting himself? You know he's not. And if you watch the All or Nothing documentary, the confidence that he exudes inside
that was brilliant, wasn't it? Yeah,
it's absolutely incredible. And the way he speaks, you can't doubt him, and you truly believe that you can achieve anything when he's speaking. He doesn't inspire confidence in one-on-one meetings as much, although we saw in the All or Nothing he does take Sterling aside a few times. But his is more speaking to the team at a team level, and it seeps out into the other players. Then those players absorb his confidence. Our manager is so confident in us as a team. Surely we must feel that way too. He's got incredible communication skills in interviews and like meetings with players, and we saw in the All or Nothing documentary he doesn't stutter. He knows exactly what he's trying to communicate. You see, he's using his hands, he uses presentations, and he's essentially the perfect role model without having to have those individual meetings the way Klopp does. So Klopp is also charismatic, but he's more caring, he's more one-on-one, whereas Pep addresses the team at a team level, and he inspires them through just being the best at what he does. The only issue with that is it sustainable long term? Do players need that arm around that shoulder, that one-on-one meeting that Klopp offers? And to be fair, Man City fans will say Pep does offer that, but does he do it enough? Is he too focused on being a charismatic leader himself, or should he focus more on the individual player relationship? So it does make you wonder whether he can sustain this long term, or whether he'll look to move on, because it does start to cause conflict with your relationship with the players.
Yeah. So do you think that Pep might start to become a bit more of an autocratic leader in the way that Jose is, or do you think he's just that's too extreme? He might veer towards that, but he's never going to go full Jose.
Yeah, I think he's too inspirational, and he's too he leads by example. Like Klopp, first on the training ground, you see him practicing by himself before the players get there. I think he cares far too much about being a master of his trade to ever become autocratic. He loves it. It's his game. It's his job. He takes pride in what he does, and he wants to be an inspirational leader. So, no, I can't see him ever going towards Jose, unless later on in his career maybe he takes a back seat and he becomes less energetic and less enthusiastic.
He does love it, doesn't he? You're spot on with that. He does love it. And I think a part of that comes from being such a successful player as well in the past. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've seen Klopp in a Schalke shirt or maybe a Hamburg shirt. I don't know, but he played for a bit, and I'm sure Jose can kick a ball. But Guardiola's got the history, right? He absolutely loves football. It's in his DNA. And what I particularly like is that he took Arteta under his wing at Man City, and Arteta has gone on to do really good things at Arsenal, including getting some silverware in his first season. Maybe not the performances in the league that they were maybe hoping for, Arsenal fans. I don't know. Get in the comments. Let me know whether you thought last season was a success or not with the FA Cup there. But in winning the FA Cup, they are in Europe next season. Got some. It looks as if at the time of recording, Aubameyang is on the cusp of staying at the club and signing a new contract. So, what bits of Pep do you see in Mikel Arteta? And do you think Mikel Arteta can? Well, what do you think of his style, and where do you rate him in terms of that new breed with Ole and Frank?
I think that Arteta has a really bright future. I see all of the best aspects of Guardiola in him. And I mean, we saw that when he beat Pep recently. And I think he has taken all of what Pep does well and built on that, but he's not trying to be Pep Guardiola. And I like that. I think when you've been under such an incredible manager for so long, it is difficult to come out and employ your own trade in a way that's different from him. We don't see the massive amounts of rotation that we see with Pep, and that's partly because of they don't have the squad depth. But I think Arteta's moving towards Frank and the adaptive nature and the transformational nature, but he is a charismatic figure on the sidelines. And we saw that even when he was Pep's number 2, he would be up there with Pep. And I think the Spanish culture, they're very, very passionate managers. And I think it means a lot to them in Spain. And I think that is a fantastic aspect of that culture to bring to the Premier League. And I think he does that fantastically well. I think he's got a really bright future, and I'd be excited as an Arsenal fan if Arteta was in charge.
I like him. Yeah, I like him. I think he's quite subtly charismatic as well, isn't he? He's quite understated at times, but then the Spanish flair in him can come out, no doubt about it. So with him and with Frank and with Arteta, you've got Chelsea and Arsenal there looking at very bright futures, we think, as with the two leaders there. What about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer then at Manchester United, the third of that trio of kind of younger managers in the Premier League? Where do you see, what's his kind of leadership style today, and how do you see him developing into the future?
Well, I should start by saying I'm a United fan. So
that's a good caveat to put in, right?
Yeah, take everything I say with a pinch of salt. But I've put here it's a participative leadership style. So Ole prides himself. He said it being one of the boys. He likes to think he's one of the boys. We do everything together as a team. He's quoted often as saying, "I love to be a part of this club, and I love to just be." That's where I think he's going wrong here. He wants to be a part of the team. He never states that he is the leader of the team. He's always being one of the boys. And as a team, we are achieving this. Not I am leading the team to achieve this. It's that confidence in yourself as a leader that I think he's lacking. When you see the way he speaks to the players, it's not that they don't listen, but they see him as one of the boys. And Frank manages to exert authority in the way that Ole doesn't. And so my issue is that sustainable long term? Because when your team aren't playing well and when there is a poor run of form, if your leader doesn't seem like a leader and he seems like one of the boys, how does he get you going? How does he pull you out of that rut? And we saw towards the end of the season when Man United are in form, because Ole gives them that creative freedom and he thinks he's one of the boys and he lets them play however they want to play. It means that they are in a fine form and they will continue that form. But when they lose, how does he pull them out of that? How does he encourage them to be better? How does he exert himself as a leader? And I don't know how he does that, and I don't think he does. And I think that's why, from an FPL perspective, I think you jump on them when there's good form. You don't look at fixtures. Man United are truly the epitome of form over fixtures. You get on them when they're in form, because when they're not in form, it doesn't matter who they're playing. They could lose 4 or 5 in a row. So I love Ole. I would keep him for the foreseeable future. I think he is doing good stuff, but I think he needs to adapt his leadership style. I think the participative leadership style isn't okay in the Premier League. I think the adaptive leadership style of Frank is probably something he should be trying to transform into. But I mean, I don't think he deserves the criticism he perhaps receives sometimes.
Yeah, well, high expectation at the club, though, isn't there? That's the thing. And I think, so how are you feeling about the United assets coming into the new season then, given that, not a particularly great result against Sevilla last night, going out of the Europa League? Maybe is that little dip of form? I mean, Ole's got, 2 or 3 weeks to grab them out of that and get them going again for the league. But do you feel like that's a bit of a rut that they might just start the season in and he needs to kind of bring them out?
That would worry me. It would. As a United fan, when we lose the previous game, I don't see any resilience in the players. I don't see them coming back out hungry. When Liverpool lose a game, they've lost their last game. Because in that first 5 minutes, they're all over the opposition. There's a ball in the back of the net. They're all over them. And you think, oh, God, I wish Liverpool hadn't lost their last game. But with United, I don't know if it's the characters. I mean, Pogba, his head drops in 5 minutes if we're losing. I think that I would be worried having 2 or 3 United assets in from game week 1 purely because of that severe loss. It genuinely, we struggle to maintain form when we've lost. So I wouldn't say avoid the United assets, but like I said, form over fixtures is so important for United, because we could go on a run of 6-7 games winning and it doesn't matter who we're playing, because Ole allows that freedom. And it's obviously a joy to play for him when you're playing well because of the fluidity in attack. But I'd be careful on loading up on them until we see the sort of form that they're going to be in.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think another team that I'm of the same thinking, actually, for the same reasons, crashing out of the Europa League potentially a bit earlier than people were hoping or expecting them to, was Wolves. And I've got my eye on the Wolves assets for next season because I think they're nicely priced, most of them. I like Daniel Prudence and I like Jota in midfield, like obviously Jimenez up front at 8.5. But again, Nuno Espirito Santo's got to really lift those boys, hasn't he? Now, coming into the new season, they haven't got the Europa League to worry about. Not going to be in Europe next season. And that was probably, it did hinder them at the beginning of last season. They definitely started the Premier League season in a sluggish way, in my view, because they had to kind of balance the start of the Premier League season 1920 and the Europa League. They haven't got that this season. How do you feel about Nuno Espirito Santo? Firstly, his kind of style, and does he fall into any of the categories that we've mentioned, or has he got another category of his own? And how do you think they'll start the season? Should we be paying more attention to the Wolves assets in FPL? Do you think they can start off with a bang?
So I'm a huge fan of Wolves and Nuno. From a psychological standpoint, irrespective of tactics, he's probably second after Klopp in all the managers in the Premier League. So I've put him down as an affiliative leadership style. Essentially, you can boil that down to harmony is the one word, and reducing intrapersonal conflict. He doesn't want any conflict between his players, and he wants to create the most tightly knit group of players he possibly can. He is literally the epitome of an affiliative leader, and he has been doing it since the start of his career. And this is where I'm saying that maybe Mourinho can't adapt, because he's been doing the autocratic style since the start of his career. But Nuno has chosen this style that isn't transformational. But I mean, he does have many of the qualities that Klopp has, but he's all about building harmony in the squad, not necessarily individual relationships, but just that team cohesion. So I was looking at some of his earlier managing career. So when he was in the Liga NOS, in the early about 2010, 2011, the first week he arrived, he was getting all of the players to do paintballing and zip wiring as a group.
Oh, nice. Okay. Yeah.
So he's all about this team cohesion outside of football. He loves to do this paintballing and zip wiring. And he says, when you have that shared common goal outside of football, it can then translate onto the pitch. And Nuno is what I would consider a psychologist as well as a leader. He understands the psychology of the game. And I mean, we'll go back to it in a minute because I think it's really important. But the lack of rotation from Nuno is his biggest strength. And it's why Pep Guardiola really, really struggles, I think, because frequent rotation is you really struggle as a player with the mental torment of being rotated constantly. And I don't think it's considered enough. We laugh about the Pep Roulette, but it is such a big deal for a player. And I think Nuno does that fantastically. I mean, he only used 20 players last year, and that was the least in the Premier League. So
is that sustainable though, Ross? Because, you know, general school of thinking is you need a squad. You've got to do that rotation if you're going to compete on all levels. Now, I appreciate City will be probably competing, you know, in the Champions League where maybe Wolves aren't. But, you know, listen, Wolves were in the Europa League last season, had a very good run. Probably paid, well, their season must have started in like July and finished in July. They probably had 12 months worth of football there. Of course, big break in the middle. But, you know, rotation's part of the game, isn't it? You need to do it. Or is it a blessing and a curse for Nuno there?
So I think that rotation becomes an issue if you don't rotate when it's out of being forced to. So Nuno has the money and the capability to bring in more players to rotate with. He chooses not to. Chris Wilder, I think there was a lack of rotation with Chris Wilder because he had very few players using his positions. He didn't have a plethora of options. I think Nuno has the options there, and he has been backed by the ball previously. So when it's his choice and he knows that he's got that risk of injury and that risk of fatigue, I think that's fine. And I think if he can manage it, I think there is multiple psychological benefits of having a lower rotation. And I think that is one of the main reasons that Sheffield United and Wolves did so well last year, is the lack of rotation. I mean, whenever you're ready, we'll go back to Pep Guardiola with the rotation, because I think that's one of the key issues that he suffers with the psychology of being a manager.
Yeah, let's talk about that then, because I think you're right. Wolves and Sheffield United, from that perspective, they were both gold mines, weren't they, from an FPL perspective last year? And I expect them to be again. Now, I know that a lot of the Sheffield United defenders have had a little bit of a price bump, but actually the Wolves defenders look pretty good. And I think I'm yet to see a draft that hasn't got Ruben Vinagre in it because of Johnny Utto's injury, right? At 4.5, he looks absolutely nailed on with a bit of a penchant for going forward as well. So that lack of rotation at the back, as you said before, for Wolves was absolutely one of the bedrocks for success for Espirito Santo. So talk to me about Pep and his rotation then briefly in terms of how that has a negative benefit on the players or negative impact on the players, let's say.
So the main, so this is again is a really hot topic at the moment in sports psychology. The idea of rotation is often looked at in youth players because youth players struggle to understand why they're being rotated, but it's been recently looked at in Premier League players and Premier League clubs. It can create an identity crisis. So we as players develop an identity as a pacey winger or as someone that likes to go on goal or someone that likes to assist and help others. We develop this identity subconsciously without wanting to or meaning to. When you're constantly rotated and you're not sure when you're going to be rotated or why you're rotated, it makes you feel like, are you good enough? Do you need to change your identity? Is your identity one that isn't stopping you from being a regular in the first team? And an identity crisis is awful for mental health. It's awful for playing time. And I think we saw aspects of that with Raheem Sterling last year. I think he played quite a lot of games in the end, but when he's rotated, it really hurts him. And I think he starts to consider, do I need to change the way I play? Linked to that, you either go one way when you're rotated. If you're scared that you're not going to get a lot of playing time, you might take too many risks, in which case your risk taking goes through the roof. And in the game, you're taking all these unnecessary risks. You get on the ball and you feel like, I've only got 20 minutes to show what I've got. I've got to take on 8 players and I've got to shoot from outside the box.
Yeah.
Alternatively, you have what they call fear of failure or paralysis by analysis. And they're two quite common terms in sports psychology. And it's essentially where you stop taking risks. You're so scared of making a mistake when you only get a few minutes to play that you then stop taking risks altogether. You don't try and take on players. You don't go for the box. You just pass the ball sideways and you think it's better to not make a mistake than to take a risk and it pay off. And either of those are obviously negative consequences of being rotated. You're not sure what that will do for you. And then the big one is it was my master's project at university.
Oh, wow.
So I studied this for 3 months. It's looking at reward sensitivity and punishment sensitivity. It is probably the hottest topic in sports psychology at the moment in performance is this reward and punishment sensitivity. So essentially punishment sensitivity means that you are sensitive to the possibility of being punished. So if there is a consequence, you will perform really well. So if you have the consequence of perhaps being dropped or from being rotated, you will actually perform well. So these are the sort of players that will perform well under Pep Guardiola. People high in reward sensitivity are going to respond positively to the possibility of being rewarded for their behaviour. So if they play well and if they score a goal, they want the possibility of being praised for that and starting the next match. So you've got these two players, Mahrez and Sterling, I've looked at. Mahrez, I think, is very high in punishment sensitivity. He responds well to being benched. He has fantastic bounce back ability, resilience. He responds well and he will perform well the next game. Whereas Sterling, I think, is quite high in reward sensitivity. So when he's dropped, the game immediately after being dropped, he never really performs very well in. So I took some stats in, I think it was June. So Mahrez started 10 games after being benched the game before. So the game immediately after being benched, he scored 4 goals and 5 assists in those 10 games. So he had 9 returns in those 10 games following being benched. That's a really good return, I think.
Nice, yeah.
Sterling, it was only 4 games he started after being benched, but he had 1 goal and 0 assists. So Sterling is not a player that responds positively to being benched. He doesn't respond positively to the idea of rotation. And when Pep's rotation is so arbitrary and you don't know why you're being rotated, if you're a player with high reward sensitivity, that can be so detrimental for your mental health and your ability to perform the next game. And I mean, it's quite ironic really, but I think Sterling probably would perform best under Jurgen Klopp. He's a player that needs that arm around the shoulder. He's that player that needs that ability to be praised and be trusted. When you're playing well, play another game, get a good run of form going.
It's fascinating, isn't it? So from a FPL perspective, if you own Sterling and he's benched, not only is that frustrating for you that game week, but there's a pretty good chance you're going to be frustrated next game week as well because of the way that he reacts to that benching. However, if you've got Riyad Mahrez and he's benched, maybe you keep him because he's
Yeah.
got bounce back ability. It's fascinating for me, absolutely fascinating. I absolutely love it. I think it's so interesting to see, the way that Pep has got such world-class talent at his disposal. Yet at the end of the day, it comes down to man manager. It comes down to personality management and how you're going to do that. I find it absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely.
Just to wrap up the video, I'd love for you to give us a bit of a feel for what you think the Premier League of leadership styles looks like. So if you were going to have, so who's at number? I think we've got a fair idea as to who we think the top manager is in the Premier League. But give us your feel for who gets the top 4 spots, who's in the Europa League, and who's getting relegated.
Right, so I've gone Jurgen Klopp to win the Premier League.
Of course you have, absolutely, of course you have.
Because I'm featuring on your channel, obviously. Jurgen Klopp is the best of the best with regards to psychological leadership. So, if we was looking at the Premier League from leadership, he'd win the league title all day. In second, just missing out, I'd say Nuno Santo.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, so I discussed it earlier. He is everything that I think modern managers should be. If they're not going to be transformational, he's always focused on harmony. So I think Nuno would be number 2. I think I've put Frank in at number 3. So
Yeah,
I think, like I said, out of all of the new young managers, Frank has the ability to adapt and he has that honesty, and he's also slowly moving towards being a transformational leader. So
exciting for Chelsea
so
fans.
exciting.
I think it's very exciting times. Yeah,
I'd be very excited as a Chelsea fan. Number 4, someone that we actually haven't spoken about, is Brendan Rodgers. I know you said that you feel like, you said you feel like that's the closest you've been before Klopp to getting to kind of responding positively to a manager. And
to be fair, before that it was Roy Hodgson or Rafa Benitez. Which is I liked Rafa, but he had a very different style, right?
Yeah. So I mean, Brendan's a great manager, and maybe we'll talk about him in the future. But he does have many transformational aspects, and I think he deals with players on a one-on-one level, but he also does strike that fear into players, and you can see he's quite a strict and authoritative manager. So I think he does really well. So that would make up my Champions League. So it'd be Liverpool, Wolves, Chelsea, Leicester, if it was based on the managers.
Right. Okay.
So just missing out on Champions League would be Chris Wilder, who again we haven't really spoken about.
Right. Yeah.
Quickly, he's got an authoritative leadership style. So he is someone that does everything that Mourinho does with regards to the autocratic, striking fear, do as I say. But he's also quite inspirational, motivational, and he sets a good example. He's very energetic. He's very motivated. And every time he criticises a player, he'll apologise straight after and he'll explain why he did that. So I think I think he does what Mourinho is trying to do, but does it better. And that's a big thing to say, because obviously Chris Wilder is not as successful as Mourinho. But from a psychological standpoint, he does what Mourinho does, but with more of a human touch. So he'd be in 5th. And then I've got 6th and 7th as Ole and Arteta. So they'd be sneaking into Europa League football.
No Pep Guardiola yet. Where's Pep?
Pep is in 9th, and it's purely...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they'd be close to a bottom half finish. And for everything that he does with regards to his tactical astuteness and to do with his brilliant, charismatic style, I think the rotation is so detrimental for mental health and detrimental for long-term sustainability. When you don't know why you're being rotated and you're doing every single game, like on, off, I don't think that's sustainable long-term. So, yeah, Pep misses out. I've got Mourinho in 12th.
I mean, Graham, down into the doldrums now. Then who's at the bottom? Who's risking slipping out the league altogether?
I mean, at the moment, there's Roy Hodgson just
wow.
out of relegation. Then you've got Steve Bruce, Daniel Farke, and Nigel Pearson, who's obviously no longer at the club. But obviously, all of the relegated managers were struggling to motivate their players, and as such, probably their psychological leadership style isn't optimal. So.
Fantastic. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the channel, Ross. Been absolutely brilliant. One thing we haven't touched on, of course, is we haven't talked about the 3 new managers in FPL and in the Premier League this season. We haven't touched on Bielsa, we haven't touched on Scotty Parker, and we haven't touched on Slaven Bilic. Now, there's 3 characters that we absolutely need to talk about, but we haven't got time in this video. Guys, look out for a video with Ross, with FPL Raptor next week on the channel. So if you're not subscribed, if you enjoyed the video today, hit the like button. You've got to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because next week we'll be doing another video where we'll be looking at those 3 characters. And I for one, I'm fascinated as to what you're going to say about Bielsa, because Bielsa,
I can't wait. I love him. He's
what a guy this guy is. And to be honest, again, underqualified over here. I know very little about the 3, other than probably Bilic I know the most about, given that he was a former Premier League manager at West Ham, wasn't he? But I don't know much about Bielsa. I don't know much about Scotty Parker and who in FPL we might want to be picking from those teams. So very interested to get your thoughts on that next week. But for now, listen, been an absolute pleasure having you on, Ross. Tell the guys where they can find you, what's your Twitter handle, etc., etc.
Yeah, so I'm mainly active over on Twitter, so it's at FPL__Raptor. I mean, you'll see me interacting with Lee a lot on Twitter. Just writing articles and threads over there. Come follow me if you like to interact and discuss psychology, and I'll be posting articles and threads throughout the season and on this sort of stuff. So look forward to seeing you over there.
Good stuff. All right, Ross. Well, thank you. Very nice to meet you. Guys, hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button, obviously, as well. And we will see you next week for another video with Ross where we will be talking about Bielsa, about Scotty Parker, and about Bilic as well, which I think is going to be just as interesting as this one today. Ross, thanks for your time. Guys, see you soon.